So are there any questions before we get started? If not, we are so excited to be partnering with North East Pediatrics. Marisa is with us today. She's going to introduce herself and highlight a lot of the questions that you sent in advance of the presentation, but also provide opportunity to ask questions. So we're really thrilled that Marisa is able to join us today, and feel free again to ask questions along the way. Okay. All right. One of the things I wanted to do is just highlight human resources, what our area does. We're WorkLife. We're located over in the EHOP building, the East Hill office building. And what we do is we offer services and programs to help balance and fit work with life. Oftentimes people come to us to see us about a variety of different challenges that they may be having. We run a parenting and pregnancy program. We do a lot with legal series. We do a lot with caregiving in general. We do a lot with adult challenges, of people leaving for medical leave, coming back from medical leave, transitioning back into work, leaving the university, coming back to the university, and so on. So we do consultations, trainings, and programs. And so you're welcome to join us at any time. There is a very robust website, and this is called the 7 Dimensions of Wellbeing. Each of those circles are a live links to a variety of different programs and services that are already free and available to all of you on the web. Okay, right now. Okay, just get this on.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Marisa Matsudaira. I am a clinical social worker, and I work at North East Pediatrics, which is a primary care facility for children 0 to 21. Behavioral health consultancy is rather a new form of providing care through behavioral health through primary care offices. And my role there is to provide children and their families with resources, skills, and strategies to address mental health, behavioral health needs. Because often, as you all know, I'm assuming a large number of you have children, it is very hard to separate children's development from their behavior and their medical needs. And so the doctors at North East Peds have really looked at sort of spearheading this model towards providing integrated care settings for children. As a clinical social worker, in addition to my work in the primary care office, I've worked in mental health, I've worked in community-based services and child welfare, but I've always worked with children and adolescents. So a little bit for the room. So how many of you have teenagers at home? Almost everybody. And how many of you have been a teenager? So I want one thing to sort of start off is I want to know that you already have an advantage over all the other parents, is that you've been a teenager before, and that there are some universals that go through sort of that stage of development for adolescents that you've been through yourself. Certainly times are different, as we always say, and the sort of pressures and challenges for our adolescents now are different than they were 10 or 20 years ago, but we certainly still have the same things happening in their bodies, in their brains, that are sort of universal. A personal disclosure of mine, my children are 6 and 9, so they are not adolescents yet. So all that I present to you is with humility and knowing that I have yet to sort of go through that sort of personal experience of raising adolescents. So I'm going to have a brief presentation today. Because it's brief, you can feel free to interrupt me as I go through. But I'm just going to go through some general sort of cognitive, social, emotional adolescent development benchmarks, as well as common roadblocks that are sort of universal for all adolescents, and then talk a little bit more about sort of adolescents who are experiencing more acute difficulties, either with their mental health or behavioral health. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some general sort of parenting strategies and sort of resources for outside support. Okay. So adolescent developmental milestones. So one of the things that I love working with adolescents is all these things that are on this list of things that are changing for them so rapidly. And the thing to remember, many people have heard this sort of compared adolescence to a sort of a second toddlerhood. And this is because the adolescent brain is developing at such an exponential rate that they are developing, strengthening sort of their synapses. I should add that I'm not a neuroscientist, so I may get some of the terms slightly off, but they are strengthening pathways in their brain. They are getting rid of ones that they don't need anymore. And so all of this is, and then additionally, all the physical changes that are happening in adolescence is causing a great deal of disequilibrium, but also a great deal of possibility that happens in adolescence. So sort of the big sort of change that we notice in adolescence is all of a sudden this capacity for abstract thinking, that they no longer only think about what is, but they start to realize what could be, what if something happened. And that is sort of a really remarkable change. If you take your 10, 11-year-old who is very like, no, this is just what it has to be because this is the way it always has been, versus all of a sudden your 14, 15-year-old is like, well, maybe we could do it a different way. And that's really exciting. It also can have its challenges as well, because then they start to question why things have always been the way that they have been. They're also learning how to take care of themselves and sort of beginning those stages of what it's going to be like to be an adult. So thinking when we think about self-care, so what do they do to take care of themselves? What makes them feel good? What makes them feel relaxed? Their hygiene skills, hopefully, start to improve during this period, and also developing more self-awareness of the need for hygiene skills. And sort of they start learning more about how to balance finances, thinking about working, thinking about school, all of these sort of things about how do they take care of themselves out in the world. And that idea of sort of, you know, launching adolescence into adulthood, what does it mean to take care of yourself as an adult? The next one is, so the identity development and also developing a sense of purpose. So not only like, who am I, what do I care about, what do I like, what do I not like, but also, why am I here? You know, what's sort of the big picture of this? And, you know, often we see adolescents who are struggling with this because they can't quite figure that out in terms of what their purpose is, and they see their peers who are good at certain things really sort of gravitate towards their niche quickly. And some adolescents have a slower sort of development of that sense of purpose, and so that can also create some comparison and havoc as they try and figure that out. And then establishing intimacy. So not only in their friendships, but in dating and also in their relationships with their family. What does it really mean to have a reciprocal relationship with someone where they are giving and taking sort of that? And so that's very different from sort of the early stages of childhood where people are there to serve them, essentially. But then they start to think about what intimacy really is. And that shows up differently in terms of how they negotiate their friendships and how they could start to consider dating and what it would mean to be in a romantic relationship. Okay, so for those of you who have adolescents, none of this should seem surprising to you in terms of these are things that are going to happen to all adolescents, some of them more severely than others. And at different times, like you may not have noticed this as a problem for your 14-year-old, and all of a sudden at 16, they're like, where did this come from? It's like all of a sudden you're a new adolescent, because again, their brain, their body keeps shifting and keeps changing. This disequilibrium is dizzying for them and for you as their parent. So mood swings, this is a general complaint of adolescents. Again, some of this is related to hormone shifts in terms of going through puberty and starting to sort of develop an adult body. But that this sort of impacts, you know, many people will comment like they were fine a second ago and then all of a sudden they're in tears. Or that all of a sudden they're yelling at their brother about the video game and they were seemingly quite content 5 minutes ago. That this sort of rapid cycling through their moods is a common complaint and normal, yes.
Clarify at what age you're kind of really talking about exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, we categorize adolescence as sort of the 12 to 19 range, but there is a difference in terms of developmental shift between early adolescence and older adolescence in terms of what you would expect. For the purpose of today's presentation, I didn't want to separate them too much because it would take a lot more time to talk about the differences in those. But some of these things, like the mood swings, you're more likely to see in younger adolescents. Hopefully by 16, 17, you start to see some of that stabilizing. Not always, but a lot of times there tends to be a shift around 14, 15, where a lot of sort of the more petulant and sort of moodiness of teenagers starts to stabilize. And that's sort of also situational, depends on what's going on in that adolescent's life that may also be contributing to that. The next is the sense of invincibility. And so some of this is, so one thing is that, you know, we often hear complaints that like adolescents don't really understand the consequences of what will happen if they try X, Y, or Z. And the research shows actually, yes, they totally understand what the consequences are doing that. They just don't think it will affect them. That they are special and unique and that that is not going to happen to them. So, you know, they may see that cutting class may have the repercussion of being suspended or having detention or being in trouble with your teacher. But for some reason, when they consider that, that is not going to happen to them. And so the sense, again, this is all their brain development working where they know what it is, but that sense of like, but why would it happen to me? It doesn't have to happen to me. Boundary and limit testing, this is also a very common complaint for parents of adolescents. And this is, again, that struggle to figure out who they are in the adult world and sort of negotiating their place in that and pushing like, well, why does it have to be that way? Why do I have to be home at 10 when all of my friends get to come home at 12? We will also say that all of your child's friends get to do everything that your child does not get to do. And this is also, some of that is this blinders and the invisibility that they do not sort of, the inability, tripping up my words, that they are constantly comparing themselves to others and thinking that everyone else sort of has it better or has it somewhat more advantageous sort of situation than they do. And really sort of hard for them to take a really overview perspective of sort of what the situation may be. Their self-esteem development happens also during this and sort of how they think about themselves. And again, this is right next to that, like the comparison piece. And so seeing peers who are athletically successful or academically successful and that may not be a strength of that child, like is hard to sort of reconcile because as they're moving into this capacity for abstract thinking, understanding that people have different strengths and different weaknesses and challenges is part of being able to think abstractly. As they're moving through that, the understanding that, you know, when we think about kids in school age, they kind of think about things as fair and we're all equal and we all can do the same things no matter what we want to do. And then adolescence is this period of realizing actually that's not quite the case. And the indecisiveness. So this is this period where, you know, you guys want to go out to dinner? I don't know. Do you want to go see a movie? So this idea that like they can't make a decision, and that we see this in more dramatic ways when it comes to time to like making decisions about whether or not to go to college or whether or not to pursue a work career or early career education, that this part of not knowing what exactly they want to do is again part of that pruning and strengthening in their brain, that those pathways that help them make those decisions in a really clear way that will get there when they're an adult are still working on being developed. And so that this is remarkably frustrating for parents where they're like, I'm just trying to do a nice thing for you, but you can't give me a clear answer on whether or not you want to do it. Can often cause friction in families. I want to stop. Are there any questions before I go? So when we start talking about more of sort of the risks of adolescence and the things, these are sort of, I've divided these into sort of the three big categories of where we tend to see the most risk for adolescents. The first, you know, and this is sort of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of it all. So certainly substance use, experimentation, and or abuse starts happening during adolescence, and part of that is exposure. You know, that they start consuming more adult media, which certainly has ads for alcohol. They I mean, you can't go 2 feet without hearing about marijuana legislation right now. And so that is a constant, sorry, I'm distracted. Oh, you're fine. So this is, and then, you know, this goes back to the invincibility idea. Like understanding that there are risks from consuming drugs or alcohol, but those aren't going to happen to them. So why don't I just try it? And also sort of that peer acceptance and the comparison piece. If their peers are using or experimenting, why wouldn't I try also to see what that's like for me? And that can sometimes have consequences. Sexual health risks, again, with the experimentation, like this and the identity development, they are figuring out how they want to establish intimacy with another person. Expressing themselves sexually is a normal part of adolescence, but figuring out how to set boundaries with another person, determining what they are and aren't comfortable with in terms of what that means for them sexually is a big thing that happens over adolescence. Determining their sexual identity and how they want to express that continues to evolve over adolescence. And then they're still, depending on their social group, they may be in a group that is more comfortable talking about sex. They may be in a group that doesn't talk about sex at all, and how that sort of impacts how they feel about themselves. They're like, none of my friends talk about sex, but I'm thinking about it all the time, or vice versa, right? I don't think that I'm interested in sex right now, but all of my friends are talking about it. So what does that mean for them as a person? And that kids find themselves in situations where they are not, even though they may be at the same age, they may be with a partner who is at a different part of their sexual expression than they are, and then they want to please that other person to develop that intimacy, and that these are risks for them in terms of thinking about how this will impact their sexual health as they become an adult. And then the mental health risks. So these are sort of my bread and butter in terms of what this comes through. So one of the things that I like to start with is so that the mental health has more awareness than ever before. I think when I was being trained as a social worker, like the level that kids in schools had any understanding of what being depressed was, or what the risks of anxiety or those sorts of things was not sort of common talked about difficulties. You know, the ones who got talked about were the ones who ended up in the psych unit, like the very, very extreme cases. But in terms of, I mean, the most recent literature I've seen is anywhere between 1 in 8 to 1 in 3 adolescents will say that they have an anxiety disorder. And so that number is kind of staggering to me in terms of how we think about being anxious. Like a lot of kids will say, I feel worried, and whether or not that meets the criteria for an anxiety disorder. In terms of anxiety and depression for teenagers, again, the hormonal shifts cause this to be a little bit more of a risk for them during this time, because those shifts can be really dramatic. One thing I always advise when I'm working, especially directly with adolescents, a lot of times kids will come in and say, well, I diagnosed myself because I saw a quiz on Instagram. And I'll say, okay. But, you know, one of the things that we want to really caution adolescents from, sort of, because there is so much information out there, is that they're really looking at information that's targeted at adolescents versus just sort of general lay anecdotal sort of things. So a lot of those quizzes and things that are out there are meant for adults, and every single adolescent will meet the criteria for being depressed or being anxious or any of these other things, because that is a normal part of their development. You know, what we talk really a lot about when we're talking about mood and mental health disorders is about what impairment is that causing them, in terms of their ability to do the things that they need to do. So going to school, going to work, interacting with their family, and the things that they want to do. So socializing with their friends, doing after school activities, those sorts of things. I wanted to say a little bit about oppositionality and conduct disorders. So these are, if your children have been involved in mental health treatment, sometimes these are labels that get tossed around. Basically, they're disorders, or more specifically syndromes, of patterns of behavior where the child disagrees with authority, continually pushes limits, and all the other things on the first slide that I said about adolescence. And so as a mental health provider, I always sort of caution parents, if they are only given a diagnosis of ODD or conduct disorder, that they really push back against their provider, because those sort of describe all adolescents. And they also, they don't actually get to the root of why that child may be experiencing those symptoms. You know, often when I see kids who have been labeled as being oppositional, they are also depressed, or they are also struggling with attention and concentration issues, that those things don't tend to exist in a bubble. And then also eating disorders are a huge risk for adolescents, specifically for adolescent girls, but more and more adolescent boys we're seeing with some of these behaviors. So these are restricting, binging, purging, and otherwise sort of feeling, doing things to sort of alter their body through their eating habits. This, again, we take the sort of the great peril of comparison, and how that is sort of fed to our children through the media, through their peers, through sort of inadvertent discussions of just what is a good diet and what's good nutrition, which is things that we want adolescents to know, but inadvertently maybe giving them negative messages about their body and their eating choices. Oppositionality, basically, disagreeing with everything an authority figure says. Conduct is a little bit more severe than that. This is, conduct disorder is usually only diagnosed in adults, but it's for people who are sort of perpetually breaking the law and have various sort of criminal behavior. Are there any other questions? Okay, so these are really general in terms of parenting strategies, because kids are really specific. But sort of I wanted to sort of start with a list to give you a list to start from. So educating yourself about adolescent development, so exactly what you're doing here today. Sort of prepping for what's next and where your child is and their sort of stages of development, and sort of being able to educate yourself so that you can also educate them. Talking early and often about all of these things. I'm gonna pick on my husband who just walked in. So I said that we have a 6- and 9-year-old, and that they are often asking us questions about sex and what that means, and, you know, why did boys and boys have sex if they're not trying to make a baby? And like, these are complicated questions to answer for a 6- and 9-year-old. But accepting those questions and saying, those are good questions, like trying to figure out how we answer those in a developmental way, and just sort of reinforcing, like, any question is okay to ask us. Even if we don't have a really great answer for you right now, we'll come back and we'll give you a better answer later. Practicing empathy and positive attention. Again, just like with your very, very little ones, adolescents want your attention. They want your approval. They want to feel sort of held in your good graces. I had a mentor, maybe like 15 years ago, who used to say, like, this is adolescence, is like, stay away and come here at the same time. And that is the sort of constant dichotomy that adolescents present with their parents. They want you close, but they also want you to give them space. And figuring out how to navigate that as a parent is not easy, because you don't necessarily know when that time is. Setting expectations, even with sort of some of the risks and some of the difficulties that adolescents may have, holding them to high expectations, expressing your values to them about how you hope they are in the world, is important for them to sort of know where those are, but sort of continuing to have a baseline of her behavior and what your expectations are. Informing them and staying informed goes along with educating them themselves. You know, we hear, not as much right now, but so there was a large period of time about 5 years ago where there were all the marijuana substitute, the synthetic marijuana sort of drugs hitting the market and all those sorts of things. I had a lot of conversations with parents at that time about how to try and stay on top of what the newest thing being released onto the market, and that there is so little regulation or so little awareness about what those things are. And if your child is coming home and saying, this is what kids are talking about, doing the research and trying to figure out what that is and how you feel about that. Respecting their privacy, and I'm gonna follow that right after, but also monitoring them. This is again the dichotomy of adolescence. Like, how do you establish that they are growing into their own person who should be able to sort of hold things that are important to them, to themselves if they're not ready to share them, but also you're still their parent, you still should be watching for signs and signals. And the media piece is really important given that how wide the sources of media are now, and whether that's through their social network channels, whether that's through TV or videos or YouTube. The media consumption? Oh. So the question was how do you sort of find that balance between preserving their privacy and also monitoring sort of their consumption of things, and the media especially? I think that it's a hard line to hoe in terms of how you sort of work that out for your individual child. And I do think that it is sort of, you can start with a baseline of sort of setting the expectation, like, I am going to give you your privacy. I want you to share things with me when you can, or I will encourage you to share things with me. And then, but that you also sort of have some limits to that. Like, if I am concerned about, like, we'll get to this on the next slide, these are signs and signals when I know that maybe you have too much privacy. Like, if I'm concerned about your grades, if I'm concerned about who you're hanging out with, or you're not following the rules at home, or you've been so irritable lately that I can't have a conversation with you. Maybe these are signs that I can't give you as much privacy as I've been giving you. So yeah, I mean, I think that you can start with sort of like, this is my goal for what I want to be able to provide to you as an adolescent, and sort of saying that this is how you show me that that's working. As if you're meeting these expectations of your behavior and your involvement in our family and your involvement in school. I think when you, but I also think that that's continually coming back and saying, tell me what you're watching on TV, on YouTube right now. Like, what's funny, what's interesting, what's stupid. Like, because those are opportunities to learn more about what that is that they're sort of consuming. Did that answer? Yeah. And making appropriate rules. So thinking about things like, a big one is often like, when should I tell my teen to get off the phone in the evening or at night? How do we set limits on sort of internet use in our house? And some families take very sort of broad, kind of like, we just shut the internet off at 11 p.m. and nobody can get on past that time. And that just sort of makes it a universal in the household. And some are sort of like, well, show me that you can handle having a cell phone responsibly by not seeing extra charges, by if I check your phone sort of randomly, I don't see anything that I shouldn't see, and then you have open access to that. So that's also knowing sort of your adolescent and their responsibility level and how they can handle those things. And then sometimes you need to pull back and set more aggressive rules if that child isn't following them. So when to seek additional support. So certainly any sort of dramatic body changes in terms of weight gain or weight loss, sleep problems, which are a common plague of adolescents. Adolescents need a lot of sleep, and they never ever get what the actual recommendation is of sleep. I think the American Academy of Pediatrics right now recommends about 10 hours for adolescents. What we tend to see more is that maybe they get, like, a great sleeper gets like 7 or 8. and then might sleep 12 on the weekend. But certainly kids who are reporting to you that they couldn't fall asleep until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and then are still getting up at 6:30 for school, we're certainly concerned about drastic changes in sleep. Conversely, kids who just cannot wake up in the morning and are sleeping 12 hours every day, we're also worried about them. Rapid or drastic changes in their personality, sudden changes in their friends, which is not necessarily indicative of that they need more support, but it might be time to start asking questions about why that happened. Yeah. Sorry, the question was to comment about the difference between sort of the drastic changes in personality versus mood swings. So I think that this is sort of like knowing your child and sort of like that it is normal for kids to sort of experience sort of periods of sadness and periods of excitement and sort of looking a little manicky and kind of crazy, as well as just sort of being like kind of blah, and right? So that's sort of like throughout the day. And that those mood swings, even if you can't always identify what sort of is causing them, usually if you unpack it a little bit after they're calm again or something, you're like, oh, that's what happened. You just sort of got a text from your boyfriend and that set off the spiral. And what I talk about when sort of the drastic changes of personality is more sort of like a general sense of their being and sort of like the day-to-day is not changing. Like, so being irritable all the time, no change, and that is not typical for your child. Being super hyper and alert and ready to do everything, and that is not typical for your child. And or sort of like withdrawing completely from the family life when they used to be at least tolerable of family dinner, and then all of a sudden they just will not come out of their room at all. So like those are the sorts of things that I mean. Sure.
What about waking up during the night and being unable to go back to sleep?
The question was about nighttime wakenings, so waking up and not being able to sleep. So it's a common phenomena. It's similar to kids who have trouble falling asleep. In terms of that, I think that like simple sleep strategies around like encouraging the child to actually like get up out of bed for 15 minutes and then trying to go back to sleep versus just sort of laying there, which is true for both trying to fall asleep versus and sleep awakenings. I would certainly, if midnight wakenings, sort of asking if those are being prompted by anxiety, if they're worried about something, that would certainly be something for further discussion and sort of talking about whether or not they want to talk to somebody about what that might be prompting. And sometimes it is that also adolescents just have awful sleep habits. And then sometimes it is sort of just talking with them about sort of basic sleep hygiene, about maintaining a consistent schedule for falling asleep and waking up at the same time, even on the weekends. And figuring out sort of what their device consumption is. Because if they're waking up in the middle of the night and then looking at their cell phone, they're probably not going to fall asleep very easily. Because cell phones are really engaging and then they light up our brains in ways that make us stay awake. Skipping school, grades falling, talk or even jokes about suicide. This is I know that in our community right now, this is particularly sensitive. There have been, in the last year, I know of 2 or 3 young men who have committed suicide, and this is a horribly tragic thing, and that we want to take kids who are talking about this really seriously. We want to ask them about suicide and how their friends are talking about this and how their peers are talking about this. What are the messages that they're getting at school? Because it is a really, knowing someone who's committed suicide is a really confusing thing to understand. It's a confusing thing for us as adults to understand that. And to understand what that is like. And again, when we go back to all the sort of risk-taking behaviors of adolescents, that we really want to talk to them about that there is help, that if this is ever something that has crossed your mind, there are people that are there to help you. I'm there to help you as your parent. Signs of tobacco, alcohol, drug use, and run-ins with the law, those ones. Okay. So that was sort of the general. Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out about resources. So this page, and these are back at the back, there's a list of them. So one of the things in my role in primary care that I didn't have as much when I was working more in mental health or community-based settings is developing an awareness of how resources for parents have changed on the web over the last couple of years. And I was doing more research and looking at these, and there are videos and there are articles and there are all the different ways that you can learn information are sort of presented for you. And they do a really beautiful job of talking about some of these things that I alluded to about brain development, about sort of the different biological and physical changes that are happening in a lot of different ways. One of the sources on the webs that I want to point out, the teenmentalhealth.org is a great resources for your adolescents to learn more, that they do a lot of sharing of information in ways that's really relatable for adolescents, and that they don't do it just through these are articles about what signs and symptoms, but talking about how this might actually play out in their lives. Understood.org is a website specifically for children with attention or learning issues, which is a great resource for parents. Childmind is specifically about mental health disorders and about different sorts of treatments, which is a great resource if you're trying to figure out, does my child need therapy and what type of therapy does my child need? That those are really great. Responsibility is about alcohol and drug use and prevention resources. Connect Safely is about internet and web and so all of the things, all of the sort of ways we're connected safely, and sort of a lot of information about those resources. There's also some really great apps now, both for parents and for adolescents, about managing both their sort of mental behavioral health and also sort of helping you as the parent sort of know what to expect. The Thrive app, which I unfortunately forgot what the acronym stands for. It's like Teen Health Resource, and then I forget what the IBE stands for, is actually an app for parents to sort of help you sort of forecast developmental stages and different things that happen, and sort of has prompts for conversations that you can have with your adolescent about certain topics, so that if you're trying to figure out how to talk to them about a certain thing, but it gives you some ideas of language to start with. It's pretty cool. These are my 3 favorite books about parenting adolescents. The first one has been around for a while, but it's really that essential dichotomy, sort of get out of my life, but first drive me to the mall. Anthony Wolfe is a child psychologist. Untangled is more specifically about the needs of teenage girls and sort of the development that happens for them. And then Brainstorm is about brain development over the adolescent period. If any of you have read Dan Siegel, he also wrote The Whole Brain Child, and it's so he talks a lot about neuroscience in a very sort of broken down, easy to digest way. And I find that stuff pretty fascinating. And then these are sort of our local resources for different avenues for help here in Tompkins County. So certainly your family doctor is a great place to start in terms of talking about your concerns and the needs of your adolescent. These first 4 are resources for mental health services for children and adolescents. The Mental Health Association and the Collaborative Solutions Network both maintain listings of private therapists who work with children and adolescents in our community. Youth and Addiction and Recovery, Alcohol and Drug are both for substance abuse. I did want to touch on suicide prevention and crisis services. In addition to their crisis line, which they say is not just for people who are suicidal, but anyone who is experiencing emotional crisis, that sometimes it's helpful if you are worried about your teen just to say, okay, let's just call and ask them what it would be like if we called, and just sort of seeing what it's sort of like just to dial the number and have someone answer. The other thing I want to mention about them is that they do also provide free after trauma services. So if there has been a trauma in your adolescent's life where that they are having trouble and you are also having trouble accessing resources, that they will sort of help triage that and also help establish services immediately. so that you're not having to wait after a trauma. Advocacy Center does a lot of work on dating violence as well as child sexual abuse. Cornell Cooperative Extension has a lot of great parenting resources for both children and adolescents. Learning Web is about career exploration and independent living skills. And then, you fix those. The other ones are about job searching and locations. Okay. So that's the end of the presentation. And I'm happy to take questions.
There's an online question about, my understanding is that it's very difficult to find a therapist for kids in this area. Is that also the experience by the speaker or others?
Yes. So the question was whether the person understood that it was difficult to find a therapist in this area, and wanted to know if that was my experience and if that was the experience of other people in the room. My experience is absolutely yes, that is difficult. We are a very resource-rich community in Tompkins County. However, the demand for services is also really high. And so I think that when I work a lot in my role as a behavioral health consultant, I often help families connect with therapists. And so I know with the agencies, they can often have several month-long waits in terms of access to service, especially because we don't want to pull kids out of school to have them get therapy, and that really limits sort of the amount of hours in the day that someone is available to work with your child. And so that creates this big sort of demand for the 4 to 7 hours in the afternoon. And certainly among private therapists as well, who may have a little bit more flexibility. There may be some therapists who do evening and weekend appointments, but one of the things that's challenging in our private therapist community is that not all of them are paneled with your insurance carriers. And so that can sometimes be an overwhelming sort of financial burden to pay out of pocket for therapy, in addition to being able to access those services. So that there's a lot of sort of navigation challenges in our system as it is, and it is certainly on everybody's mind about how do we improve sort of access to people when they need it, because that can certainly be one of the reasons for having my position in our primary care office, is knowing that, you know, when children present and say, okay, well, yeah, I do think I want to talk to somebody, and then we say, okay, so wait 3 months, and then you can talk to somebody, that's not necessarily really helpful, because in 3 months that child may have gotten worse. They may have decided, well, you know what, nobody cares, no one was there when I decided I wanted help, I'm not going to ask for help again. And so we want to avoid that whenever we can. Targets of anything specifically? Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question was about how to help the younger sibling who may be the target of this adolescent's mood swings or sort of irritation in the way that, and how they, especially if the older child really wants attention from the adolescent and isn't necessarily getting that reciprocated. So some of this is normal, right? That as adolescents are developing, younger siblings all of a sudden, even if they're only 2 or 3 years apart, all of a sudden seem light years away from where they are sort of developmentally. And so this is a common sort of struggle for younger siblings to be like, we were best friends a second ago, we were just playing Legos, and now you can't like deign to like talk to me at dinner time. So one is like continuing to set expectations with your adolescent about their behavior and about sort of how they interact with their family. So maintaining kindness, maintaining like respectful attitudes towards all members of the family, not just their parents, is important, right? It is also respecting like your adolescent's desire for privacy may mean that they don't want to have little brother or little sister sort of tagging along with them when they go to hang out with a friend, or that they don't. So trying to set some boundaries where, yes, you should have time to sort of be with your peers, that without sort of having to worry about that piece. You should be able to have time by yourself. That's normal and expected. And then talking to little brother or little sister about, this is going to be their time, and then we'll find a time when we're all going to hang out together, or when you guys can hang out. So like setting some parameters about what those expectations might be.
How do you teach time management to teens? They're so overwhelmed with homework, breakfast, dinner, even asking for take a shower is a struggle.
So the question was, how do you teach time management to teens? Yeah. So it's especially a struggle, I think, for some of our teens who are really into sort of exploring all the things that are available to them, that they want to do well in their academics, they want to do athletics, they want to do clubs, and then they find themselves really overburdened with sort of the stresses on their time. They're like, I don't have any downtime. And then we have kids who don't know what to do with downtime because that is uncomfortable for them. And so teaching those time management skills is a lot about thinking about how to forecast. Like, we want to start teaching them some of these organizational skills and executive functioning skills that they'll need as an adult. So how do they plan what are going to be the demands on their time this week? How do we help them forecast? You think that you're going to have enough time to do X, Y, and Z, but really, like, maybe it's just only X that can get done this week, and how do we sort of prioritize what needs to happen first? So really helping them to think about what is going to happen next and next and next is really important skill in time management. Sometimes we as adults still have trouble with some of those pieces, but that's really sort of the goal is to help them continually to be able to sort of forecast and build a little bit more understanding of what are the other demands and how are they going to balance sort of the things that they want to do and the things that they need to do. And if it's really not working, or if it's causing more stress, how do you let something go that may still be important to you if it's ultimately causing you more stress than benefit?
And at some point, I think that I would like a clarification around this, because we included her in a higher level discussion. I found out later that she thought we were And is there some guideline for how much to involve that?
Yeah, so the question was about boundaries and also around sort of like money management and how much to sort of involve kids in conversations about family finances and things like that. And in this case, the daughter becoming more alarmed than probably was necessary about the family's finances. I think that I don't think that there's a hard and fast boundary. I think that it's incremental, and that sort of trying to measure where you are compared to the last conversation that you had about money versus the next conversation is helpful. Sometimes we make mistakes and we find out that we gave kids too much information or more information than they needed, and then they'll let us know in some way that we've done that. And that's okay to sort of say, oh, I realize we shared too much information with you. We really don't think you need to worry about this, or this isn't something that really is affecting you right now. You can trust mom and dad or whomever that we have this handled and that we're going to think about it. Those things can sometimes be hard, because then the kid will be like, well, you told me all this before. Because then they'll push that limit again. It's like, why won't you tell me more? And so that sort of like, I think that's just sort of a standard of being incremental with how much you're choosing to share about some more of the more sensitive pieces of your family life. But knowing also that it's also okay to just own a mistake to your child and say, yeah, that was too much. And so we're not going to share that much with you again right now.
Sometimes I think it's hard to distinguish between what's behavior that's adolescent or moody and screen time impact.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, kids becoming irritable and defiant, and sometimes I think it's really a result of being just looking at their phone for several hours.
Sure.
How do you navigate that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, oh, sorry. The question was about navigating screen time and sort of distinguishing the differences between sort of general irritability and irritability spent from spending 6 hours on their phone. And how do you talk with your adolescent about sort of just setting those boundaries and the impact that too much screen time may be having on sort of their mood and affect and things like that. I think one of the things that I like to talk about with adolescents, especially when there are a lot of complaints about how much time that they're on their phones, is really talking about what sort of screen time does to their brain and how that impacts their brain. And that there is, some good science and descriptions of, that all of the way websites and social media channels and all those things are designed are to trigger the reward centers of your brain. And that they just want to make, so every time you click on another link, a ping goes off in the back of your brain. It makes you feel happy. And so you do another one and it makes you feel happy, and you do another one and it makes you feel happy, and then you stop. And then you don't have anything that's making you happy anymore because it is just not there anymore. And so we are sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It is creating like a false sense of reward by sort of continually being on the phone, and it's sort of triggering that. What we want is for kids to learn how to sort of seek those same things that make them have that thing be accomplishing something in their life that's important, scoring a goal in a game, connecting with a friend, doing something really well around the house. We want them to also be able to know other ways of sort of triggering that reward center in that brain that makes them feel good and makes them feel good as a person. But if we only do it through sort of that cell phone, we're sort of manipulating, if the cell phone is manipulating their brain to think that this is the only way they can feel good. And that, that some kids, especially as they become older adolescents, they can respond to that and say, oh, it's really this company has figured out the way to sort of trick my brain into keeping me on this site as long as possible. And that, sometimes adolescents can respond to the way let's stick it to the man and don't let them, don't let the website drive our behavior. But that I think that giving them information about what we know about how those things sort of artificially sort of stimulate our brain, and how, as we as parents want them to learn how to do that for themselves without the use of a device.
Any particular suggestions to foster parents, teen foster?
The question was, any particular advice to foster parents of teenage foster kids? I think that that is a particularly difficult undertaking, and particularly difficult because of some of the attachment struggles that children who have been separated from their parents for whatever reason will experience. And so that some of the sort of typical boundary pushing and limit testing and moodiness, that these are going to be accentuated by that trauma of not being able to be with their parents any longer. And so certainly, I think developing some awareness of the impact of trauma on attachment is helpful for a foster parent. I've worked with foster parents in the past. And so one of the things is sort of, again, educating yourself about the likely impacts. One of the things that's true about children who have been affected by trauma and attachment is sort of the simple strategies that we teach all the parents tend to backfire. And so it takes much more sort of nuanced learning and sort of digging in to sort of being there for the long haul. And I think that that's always, if you think about that, all teenagers are doing this. A child who's been either abandoned or been forced to separate from his parents, that's sort of thrown this all out, and that they have no idea which way to sort of push or pull, because that sort of underpinning of sort of our basic attachment to a central figure has been disrupted.
Talk about learning more about having all this information, all these conditions. Teens, to what point, sometimes that could be numbing, paralyzing. How do you have conversation when there's so much information out there, so many videos, and how do we have that conversation of how to best filter it, and that is relevant, or like you said, it's become, it's overwhelming and generalized.
Okay.
Too much information.
Okay.
And then that's just sort of trying to sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
What makes them most relevant to them, and how can we use that as a power for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just all this information.
Yeah. So I think the question was sort of like, how do you avoid overloading information, because there is so much information available about development for both for parents and for teens. And how do you know sort of where to start, right, in terms of all these conversations that you could be having with your child? I think one of the things is really prioritizing for you as a parent first, sort of like what's important for your child to know. What are your values, and sort of starting from that place, you know, that you want to build a foundation of your family values that you can use to sort of guide those discussions, and sort of just saying, hey, did you ever know like how important it is to me for people to be kind to each other? Like that's something that I just really think is super important, and like using that, because people being kind to each other can lead into lots of other conversations about sort of adolescent development and the challenges of being an adolescent, because that your child has probably experienced people not being kind to each other in any number of ways. I think that that's a good place to start, is really thinking about that piece, and then asking your child, like, what's really important to you? Like, what are your values? And like, and asking them to help you understand sort of who they want to be as a person and what's going to be important to them, helps them start thinking about that. And then you can share information as they start to sort of experiment with that sort of thinking, like, what's important to me? How do I want to be in the world? Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that, so this, where is it? Oh, so the question was resources specifically for teenagers where they can go and look sort of for these things. One of the things, I think this Kids Health, there's also a Teens Health, which is the same Nemours Foundation out of Delaware that produces all these information. All of their materials are talking directly to teenagers. And they have every single topic you can think of. It's pretty amazing. I think, again, that teens mental health, if it's more specifically about mental health issues, is great, but they have a lot of guidance also around negotiating conflict with peers, negotiating with a teacher. Like if you, you disagree with your grade, what should you do? Yeah, absolutely. One more? Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So the question was about how do you balance sort of time spent sort of on just sort of general recreation devices versus time spent on schoolwork, especially if you're starting to notice some school grades falling, and then added where the teen is feeling like the time on device time is like that is recreation, like that's the only outlet that they have to feel good and feel connected to people, which unfortunately we hear from a lot of teenagers that these online communities is where they feel most accepted and where they feel like they have a community there. And I think that that is a hard balance to sort of set, and thinking about how to sort of negotiate and navigate that. I think, sort of the ideal being like, yes, like your grades are falling, you should be putting more focus into your schoolwork and making sure that you're spending the time that you need to. But also, like, the time that you need to can happen at different times of the day, right? Depending on your adolescent schedule. So depending on, that this is the part to sort of collaboratively problem solve with your child. It's like, okay, I want you to do your schoolwork first. You're telling me that you need some downtime before you start your schoolwork. Let's negotiate how much downtime is reasonable. And can you show me that you can do that by bringing your grades up? And if you can, then that's great and it's working. And if you can't, then we're going to maybe go back to my way.
All right.